It's great being with you here because it really makes me feel I'm not alone. Because you just mentioned that we are facing worrying times, so reading newspapers is not fun at all nowadays. So that's why sometimes I'm really worried, but per se I'm a very optimistic person. So that's why I'm still working and I'm still being with you here, and that's great. And let me start with one very bold statement, and I think we already sense that it's probably true. We need a strong civil society. And what I want to do with you now is talk you through, the question, why do we need a strong civil society? Alongside with, you mentioned that private sector and a strong government, but I think we do believe we do need a strong civil society. And then also alongside with the government, so that's the first part. Then secondly, what is the current status of civil society? And then thirdly, leading to the key question, how can we unleash the power of civil society? How can we scale up civil society? How can we scale up impact? So these are the topics I want to touch very briefly for the next few minutes. I already said that I don't want to depress you, but reading newspapers is really difficult and sometimes hard to stand. And just adding to what you said, also realizing what's going on in the UK at the moment, but also I mean, you mentioned that there is also the dark side of civil society. It's not only just the 1930s in Germany, it's happening now. I mean, so it's really worrying to see the populism we see that's really dangerous for the social cohesion we have in our country. We see things like climate change, we see plastic waste, we see migration integration. So I could continue this list for a long time, and that's really depressing. And whenever we are talking about social issues, global issues, many are just calling for the governments, for the multinational organizations, for the states. And of course they do play a role, and they are doing something and they're achieving impact. But obviously they are not able to solve the issues alone. And there are a lot of people also relying on the market powers. And I really do believe in the private sector and the strength of the private sector, but obviously private sector is not able to provide solutions to all those issues. So then the question is, who is able to do that? And I think part of the solution is the so-called third sector, civil society. This is something which is really strong. Interestingly, many people do not know what is civil society and how big it is. And most people completely underestimate the potential we're having within civil society. And I would like to, at the beginning, just give you an idea what we are talking about. So just looking at the numbers, I mean, we are talking about roughly 10 million NPOs worldwide. So that's huge. We're talking just alone in Germany about 600,000 nonprofits. So that's awesome. We are talking about roughly 30 million people being volunteers in Germany for nonprofits. So that's really something which is huge, and that gives a lot of also confidence in shaping the future. And we just heard an example from you, how you do that with the Red Cross. So that's great. But it's not just about the sheer numbers. It's also that the civil society has some very specific strengths, which are very unique. And here are just a few points. So one thing is, there is a very clear, strong normative power. Because the ultimate goal of nonprofits is, except for the few ones which are on the dark side, but the ultimate goal is to achieve positive impact. And that comes also with the fact that it is able to bring together a lot of people. So there is a lot of participation. People coming together from different backgrounds, different social backgrounds, migration background, etc. So this is where also social glue is really tangible. We also have a huge level of innovation, because civil society is usually very close to the issues. And due to the fact that they were so close to the issues, to the challenges, they are also able to develop tools and instruments. The question, and we will talk about that, is how can we scale up those instruments which have been developed on the ground? So these are just a few things where I do believe civil society is very different from state and also from the private sector. And the question is, why is the power of civil society not as strong as it could be? And I have 3 different clusters of challenges which civil society might want to overcome to really fulfill its full power. So the first cluster is around fragmentation. So you can read the number of 600,000 nonprofits in Germany. It's a very positive number. At the same time, you can say, oh my gosh, how fragmented is this world of nonprofits in Germany? And both is true. Of course, it's great to see the variety, but at the same time, quite frustrating because the wheel is reinvented over and over again. Organizations are way too small to really have impact, but they don't know each other, with whom to collaborate, etc. So that's one of the issues we are facing, so that the nonprofit sector is intransparent, and the nonprofit sector is, in many cases, are not willing or able to collaborate. When I'm talking about collaboration, I'm also talking about collaboration between the nonprofits directly, but also across the sectors. So between nonprofits, the state, and the private sector. And this is also then the solution. So we need a basic transparency. I know that in some countries, I have to make that remark, for civil society, it's dangerous to be transparent. Because here, of course, they have to hide. They cannot be transparent. But in a country like in Germany and others, we should have a basic transparency about who's out there. Secondly, we should be honest. I mean, we are talking about collaboration. When we are talking about collaboration, we should be also honest about what are the interests of the different parties. And in my experiences, in many situations where partners are coming together, they're always talking about the big impact they want to achieve, but then they're talking about what also might be the hidden agenda, what are other incentives they're having. So please be honest when you collaborate. And once you have done that, so you're transparent, you know who's out there, you know what are the interests, then you can really start collaborate. And this is something which needs to be incentivized, in particular across the different sectors. And I know during the panel we will also talk about public-private partnerships, etc. So this is, I think, one of the key elements. Let me do one deep dive on scaling, because that's very closely linked to the idea of collaboration. So once you're working together, you have the intention to scale up your idea, to scale up your impact. And there are different ways how you can do that. So the first step is just to do knowledge sharing, to learn from each other. That sounds easy and trivial, but in many cases I don't see that. Organizations, in particular in the nonprofit sector, where everything you produce should be public good, are not talking about what they're doing. And in many cases, they're even not honest. They're just showcasing how much success they're having, but nobody talks about failures. So it also starts with talking about honestly what doesn't work, because only if you understand that, you can also scale up the good things. So this is the first level and approach, how you can scale up. Just sharing what you have learned and scaling your knowledge. The second level is that you are transferring your knowledge to partners. So you might have a partner in another region, so you have invented something in Berlin, which might also work in Hamburg. So find a partner to whom you can transfer your idea, and that person, that organization can then also be the operating partner for you. And that can be also across the different sectors. And in that context, maybe also one buzzword, collective impact. So in many cases, it might be interesting to bring together partners from different sectors, develop a strategy together, define goals you want to achieve, and then collectively work towards those goals. So this is maybe something which is quite new, in particular to the German nonprofit sector and the intersection between the different sectors. The third idea is when it comes to social franchise, I think the word already explains what the model is. Here we can learn a lot from the private sector. But as usual, whenever we are transferring instruments from the private sector to the nonprofit sector, we have to be very sensitive and not just adopting it one-to-one, but really making adjustments. And then the last thing is, and here we are really talking about growth. So how can we grow interventions? How can we grow organizations so that they can go either in other fields along their value chain? How can they go in other regions, etc.? And here again, we can also use instruments from the private sector, where growth of companies is very clear and very strategically. In the nonprofit sector, it's not that easy, because in many cases you're not even incentivized to grow, because the donors don't understand that, because it's much more interesting to start a new thing instead of scaling up a already existing and impactful organization or approach. And also the capital is not that easy. So you have a lot of funds in the private sector doing growth funding, in the non-profit sector, it's very difficult to get that funding. So these are 4 different levels how you can scale up your idea, and I'm sure we will discuss that throughout the panel. So this is the first cluster of issues we might want to overcome if we want to really support civil society at a broader scale. The other one is around impact. We talked about that, you said due diligence is needed, so we really have to focus on the impact. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. You might want to say it's the ultimate goal of any given nonprofit to achieve impact, yes, but that doesn't mean at the same time that the strategy is always an impact-oriented strategy. So the question is, how can we do that? How can we transform that? And it starts basically on both sides, on the side of the donors and on the side of the nonprofits. And the solution is, of course, we have to start thinking from the beneficiaries, from the issue, and then do backwards engineering to come up with intervention. In many cases, organizations start from the budget or start with an idea instead of what is really needed. So that's what we need, and we need donors really willing and able to do sustainable funding. That means not just fund projects, but fund organizations, including overhead costs, do long-term funding, fund also that organizations can develop with supervision, etc. So these are just a few things where the donors have a lot of responsibility for a powerful nonprofit sector. And then the last point is, and that's our own fault, we are not self-confident enough. The nonprofit sector is always some kind of hiding. They are creeping towards the donors, asking for funding instead of saying, okay, we are the ones really doing a great job for society, so we should also be proud. And that is an attitude which I'm sometimes missing in the nonprofit sector. And so this is also a call towards more self-confidence and developing also approaches how we can act on eye level with the other sectors and the potential partners. And if we do all those things, if we overcome all these different barriers, and I know it's not an easy thing and it's not one solution, there are a lot of solutions to do that, then I'm quite confident that at some point we might not just be frustrated reading newspapers. At some point we might also see nice news in the newspapers, and I'm quite sure that if we come to that stage, civil society will have played an important role to make this place a better world coming to these news. So we need a strong civil society scaling up the impact. Thanks.
Thank you, Andreas. We should have a conference just only on philanthropotainment. Not least to discuss what it really is, because I think if that could be the way forward, philanthrotainment. So help us out on that in a moment, okay?
I will, yeah.
Does anyone want to come in immediately and say what's missing is? Because then you can help us set the agenda. Anyone? Yes, one thought here, please.
I think what's missing is the language of resistance and solidarity. Solidarity not in the form of simply, I would say philanthropy and NGOs, but in the old-fashioned but absolutely essential sense of, people mobilizing themselves, resisting.
All right. That's a voice from Myanmar.
I thank you very much for
the language of resistance and solidarity.
The role of civil society is very depending on the circumstances we are operating in. So hearing where you are coming from, of course, the role of civil society is a completely different one, because here it's about resistance, here it's about being a critical voice, also shaping the agenda of society. In other countries, like in Germany, it's completely different. So it's more that we are, of course, also the critical ones, but in partnership with the other sectors working towards solidarity and achieving something for global goods.
Okay.
Come back to that just for 30 seconds. But I think if you look around the world, only 4% of the people live in places where they don't need to wage resistance. Yeah? And so we're talking about 95% of the globe, 95% of the population in the world that need to struggle for physical safety, let alone free speech. Yeah? So I think resistance is extremely important. And I think Europeans have been the victim of your own success, peace, prosperity, the American provided security infrastructure. And you've been so spoiled ideologically and intellectually to think that things can be dialogued away. And there is also limits to dialogue. And that is why many of us risk our lives, literally, to live as equal and respect-worthy humans. That is why I want to inject the language of resistance.
Surely that's an important issue. The framing may be too Western at the moment or too developed world. And there are other voices here who would probably be saying the same thing. That maybe there's another slide or another dimension you need to add to that. So this is the great thing about a workshop like this, to actually hear other points of view. And Ruben's acknowledging that as well. Thank you. Thank you to you for organizing this. Anyone else quickly? Please. Just one. Right, Sylvie. I should tell you that Sylvie's here from Co-Impact, but your chief executive couldn't make it today.
Just to add
Olivia.
to the points that have already been raised very validly, the reflection of civil society is also a reflection of the funders on the other side and how philanthropic capital is behaving in this world. And the dispersion of effort that you see in civil society is also on the philanthropic side. We know that in the world, more than 50% of foundations have assets of less than $1 million. So how are we asking these social entrepreneurs that are working on the front line to collaborate with each other when we in the philanthropic world are also not collaborating with each other, when we are giving grants year by year as opposed to committing for the long term, when we are putting so many restrictions that it ends up being that real nonprofits do work to the budget because they know that they don't have a chance to get any more, because they know that there's no funding standing behind them and saying, you have already demonstrated impact and evidence of impact in the place that you're working. What does it take to take this to scale of millions? So I think it's also very important to recognize, especially for those that are funders and philanthropists in the room, the role that we all play in creating these issues with civil society.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We're going to get a lot of points put on the agenda here, but many of them may not be resolved in the time we have available. Sunita, quickly.
I think the fundamental thing that was missing for me was that it was too European, and it was not global, it was more German. So it is not the world vision that I come from. Civil society for me is also a whole lot of grassroots movement. It's about the subaltern groups, it's about the most excluded, and their voices coming out, and facing political, social, and economic resistances to get those voices heard. So civil society is just not a project. It is much more than that. It is probably survival itself for millions out there in the developing countries.
Not a project, but an issue of survival. Okay, thank you very much. And Ruben's agreeing with that. One more at the back, please. And I'm just conscious, what we're doing here is not trapping you after you've given a presentation. It's really a question of developing thinking, and that's what's really important about something like this. Right at the back, please. And would you mind reintroducing yourself?
Okay, hi. My name's Kieran. I'm a PhD researcher from Tilburg University in the Netherlands. I just spent a year in the field in Malaysia, working with Rohingya, Syrians, Afghans, and Somalis, who are development actors. They are creating change. They're grassroots activists. The problem I have is that we're talking about partnerships in a fragile world. We should be talking about strengthening fragile partnerships. These actors have a great deal of distrust with other NGOs, with UNHCR, with governments, and we are not addressing the causes of their distrust. So, fragile partnerships, can we make them stronger?
Please.
I think we're taking for granted the notion that we can take for granted a good civil society, that it's always going to be there. And I come from the world of schooling, and I believe we need to build those foundations at schools. Right now, I think so much of education is what I'd call technical. Not technical in an occupational sense, but how do we teach mathematics? How do we teach a second language? And so on and so forth. And I think we can all, beyond government, work with schools to promote how do we build a good civil society? How do we celebrate integration within schools? How do we work for an understanding of interfaith dialogue and our shared values? We heard last night that we don't have a shared faith, but we might have shared moral values. And her official spoke today of a deliberate democracy. How are schools working for deliberate democracy, and how are we celebrating the success stories and learning from the difficulties that we go along?
All right.
And I think that might be another conference, but I think that's worth talking about.
All right.
So
Well,
we have something 30 years down the line.
What I'm asking is to capture, in not a lot of detail, some of your concerns, because I think for all five sitting around here, it's about how you might want to refine what you're addressing and realizing the delegates we've got here and where they come from. Goran, you've got to leave, I think. It's Goran who will, no, Geert, you need to leave early. A regional director for the Middle East and North Africa from UNICEF. Goran Buldioski, welcome, co-director for the Open Society Initiative for Europe. Megan Roberts, who's deputy director of policy planning at the United Nations Foundation. And Ruben is with us still, and again. And still wants to speak, but I've already said, just hold it, Ruben, because he's going to speak in the moment as part of the panel. But Geert, can I come to you? Because not just because you've got to leave at about 20 to 4 and going to be replaced by Tom, but also because of the contribution you can make about the way UNICEF is seeing this, about the role of civil society, but above all, the impact and what needs to be done in these new situations we've been discussing for the last 20 hours.
Well, thanks, Nick. Maybe a couple of reflections. I definitely don't come with much answers, but helping to contribute to the thinking. First, for me, the question is, when we talk about impact, what exactly are we talking about? Scaling up impact, there are different elements to it. From where I am sitting, more impact means we need absolutely reaching more people, because there are still so many people unattended. It is also a question of intervening much more timely. For too many people, assistance is arriving too late. It's a question of the quality of our assistance. It is about more impact in terms of being more accountable to the people we are serving. And last but not least, to guarantee that our assistance is also much more sustainable than it is today. So for us, when you talk about scaling up impact, there are these different dimensions to be considered. How can we increase impact? Well, maybe starting with the point Sylvia has made on the funding. It is important to flag, when I look at an organization like UNICEF, how our funding becomes growingly conditional. Conditional in terms of it to meet other agendas than the needs of the people we are supposed to be serving. It is about meeting political agendas, it is growingly meeting economic agendas, fiscal agendas, and not any longer just the needs of the people we are serving. I'm sure these other agendas have played in the past as well, but what we see over the last 5 years is how fast the conditionality grows. And with conditionality comes obstacles, because conditionality doesn't give us the flexibility, to serve our people. Because in certain conditions it is, well, with my money you can serve that part of the population, but not that part of the population. With my money you can work through this partner, but not through that partner. Now, with the unprecedented, and you're absolutely right, Nick, the unprecedented number of challenges we are facing, you need to get that flexibility. Unfortunately, the funding reality is going into the opposite direction. In terms of
Can I just check, what do the numbers look like for UNICEF then? When you say the numbers are going in the opposite direction, what is the percentage you're working on now?
If I look at UNICEF's global budget, 60 to 65% becomes earmarked funding, and only 30% is flexible funding.
And the level of funding as well in total has gone down?
Yeah.
How much?
Well, decreases by 10-15%.
Okay, so 65% earmarked.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the first point. I think civil society, a lot has been said by Andreas and other colleagues. I think in terms of others to engage, because indeed we need more actors mobilized. A couple of reflections again. I think one is looking at the people we are serving, the people in need, also as partners to contribute to the response. Because you look in whatever crisis, you will find amongst the people in need loads of people with entrepreneurial thinking, people who are really committed to contribute to the response, but too often still we approach them as the victims and the people who need to receive, rather than people who can partner with us in the response. Another important group that is having a potential untapped is the group of young people. And yes, some of them will find themselves organized in civil society, but an even a bigger group is completely unorganized. We have, if I look at the Middle East region for the moment, with all the crises, we have an incredible demographic dividend, with young people representing the bulk of the population. However, you know, because of the situation where they find themselves, because of poor education, coming back to what the colleague there, just said, there is a lot of potential truly untapped into. I think young people need to be looked into as agents of change much more than we currently do. The private sector has been mentioned. Absolutely, the private sector is very often a partner.
Were you here this morning when Michael Keating was talking about it? Because he had a fascinating example from Somalia, how bringing the private sector in Somalia had been vital to stopping conflict.
And absolutely it is. And also for helping a response to go to scale. It's critical. However, an important footnote. With private sector, it needs to be shared value partnerships. So we need to start from the same values, from the same principles, and not just be driven by the private sector's own agenda. So let me maybe stop here with a few reflections from our perspective.
All right, but that funding issue is a real constraint now. That's what you're putting on the agenda.
It's an absolute, it's the conditionality, or the growing conditionality, that becomes a huge constraint indeed.
Goran.
My biggest problem is that I see more and more thinking, especially in the developed world, with the civil society as being part of the system. And actually a system that is confronted with us and them thinking. And then the civil society becomes part of a loaded elite. And that's actually my biggest concern. Probably Europe and US, one of the key places where this happens. And I say this because actually listening to the colleagues coming from what we will label as developing economies, I think they held much bigger and better solutions for people in the rich part of the world than we do. Because actually it's the politics of disruption that varies success. And I think we're not masters in that, because I agree with the colleagues that in Europe we've been pampered. We've been way too comfortable, and we've actually accepted the system, which inevitably is an unjust system, like every system in the history of humankind. And you know, the whole point about the development has been also to push it. Now, it doesn't mean to push it with violence, and I thought that, you know, this is actually one of the biggest achievements in Europe. But you know, we live in times where actually you're surprised. We are all surprised to see that even violence in Europe brings bigger dividends than a non-violent action. Think yellow vests. I'm not going to go further in that, but I think what we need is actually really reimagine the civil society as a disruptor. Now, it doesn't mean as an anarchist to uproot the entire system, to sort of, build towers and businesses and homes and cars, but it means like a disruptor of what a great number of population thinks that it's an unjust system.
Can I pick you up on that, just for clarification? Sorry to interrupt, but when you say civil society is becoming part of the system and the elite, that in its own way is pretty disparaging, part of the elite. The use of that word suggests that in many ways that means civil society is becoming less effective. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and I would even use a different keyword. It's becoming less relevant. Because I think here the issue is more of relevancy, because do people see it as relevant in their daily life? The basic question is, if there is no civil society, who will miss it tomorrow at their daily level? And I think we're back even to that in Europe, because we thought that in the developed democracies we will go all the way by having service provision or support into that, and up all the way to policy advice. Now we are back to some of the basics, and we are back to some of the basics also in the most developed countries, because we like to see the GDP per capita, we like to see this wealth that is created, but actually if you're down there somewhere in Poland or Hungary, or for that matter even in Germany and UK, in UK people like to talk about these places called communities left behind. Actually, in absolute terms, these people are powerful, are living in poverty. Let's not forget that in Poland, one of the key issues about basically what is a radical right government was to bring $3 a child per day extra, and that's their winning strategy. I'm talking about the 500 zloty child subsidy that the government brought. That's actually a government that doesn't share democratic values of the sort that we share here around. But they've actually addressed something. And, think in those terms, because people say, hey, 500 zlotys and so on, it looks a lot. Actually, if you break it down in a currency that is more known to euro or dollars, you will have $3 a day. And actually, then you can, that's something that also the entire globe can understand that it's not actually that much. While it made a fantastic difference. Now, where I see, I would have liked civil society to be the vanguard, and civil society to be actually those that bring the change, not a radical right government. And this is where I think that it's a problem that, sometimes unjustifiably, but civil society is seen as an extension of let's call it even a liberal elite, and on purpose I put this with a bad language of the populist politicians, but this is actually what resonates with increasing number of people, and I think we have to be actually worried about.
Well, let me press you, because if you had Andreas's bullet points up there, how would you define civil society? I'm fascinated by what you're saying. Civil society is becoming part of the system. And the elite, and it needs to be a disruptor, otherwise it's becoming less relevant. Yeah. How do you define that in a way which then means civil society has impact? Are you saying, actually, we use the term civil society, maybe even in this discussion, as just a very convenient way of just describing something we're not quite sure what it is? Yeah,
let me answer with an example, because I think it's important that colleagues here around feel something intangible, that we're not only talking in whatever conceptual land. In Hungary, where we've been active for for decades, our foundation actually made the name in Eastern Europe. We've been supporting for decades a lot of various initiatives, but most of them in the capital, because we believe that actually when you support the best and the brightest, which, surprise, they tend to flock in the capitals because they follow certain logic, then actually those ideas will actually travel and they will permeate the rest of the society. Now, I have to tell you, very nice theory of change on paper, in practice it didn't. Because one of the key issues was not about what these people know. Actually, the key issue is who these people are. Since recently, we started supporting regional centers in two of the regional capitals, Debrecen and Pécs. And we work with great people there on the ground. I can tell you, a gray cell by cell, they're not better than those in the capital. But it's much harder to attack them. it's much harder to uproot them because they actually are respected for who they are and where they sit, and not so much about what they know. And I think this is one of the issues that we sort of, when I say the civil society, we took this route of competence, which is not a bad route. I mean, look, I'm a former researcher. I believe in data. I believe in rational dialogue. It's not that I'm disparaging that, but I think what's important is that we started believing only in this part of the story. We forgot that being human means also feeling things on the skin, and that's why I feel that colleagues in the rest of the world face this more often than we do. And one of the things that even in the rich world we have to see the poor next to us, and I think this is what we forget, because the moment when we address that, I think the civil society will be more relevant, and it will be considered sometimes unjustifiably so, but still as a part of an elite that gets loathed by an increasing percentage of population.
Just a reality check. How is open society now seen in Hungary?
Oh, with all pink eyes. If you have no, I'm joking.
Red, you mean red eyes?
No, I'm joking. Of course, negative. If you have spent more than whatever, I have to count 115 million euros in campaigns against our founder and against our brand, I can tell you 90% of the population is brain. I would even say they look negative at us as a subject of a 100 campaign.
I'm not saying this facetiously, but obviously
you
are seen as a disruptor.
Yes, but I have to tell you, we are not a disruptor because we were a disruptor. It's like seeing 1984, I forgot the name of the key enemy of that state. Now I forgot the name of the guy. He had a Jewish name, surprisingly so. But this is how you create a disruptor without actually us being the disruptor.
Megan.
Thanks so much. There have been a lot of really important points that have been raised already, but I wanted to start by building off of something that Geert started around working with the private sector and the importance of an alignment on values. And wanted to point to something that we at UNF are seeing. We work with the private sector and helping to bridge partnerships with the UN. And we are seeing, it's not yet universal and it's still a process in motion, but a broader recognition on the part of private sector partners that commercial success is really quite intimately tied with working with purpose and working ethically. There was quite an interesting survey that came out either last week or the week before by Vodafone that asked respondents, all business, private sector, about working with purpose, and over 80% believe that working with purpose and working with an ethically driven strategy increases revenues. And I think, again, work in progress, but that broader recognition is also opening the door to different types of partnerships with UN actors, but with other partners in civil society. I also wanted to, Ruben brought up technology earlier in the day. I wanted to bring that into the conversation because I think that is a really important avenue that the UN and other international organizations are looking at. The UN itself has a whole network of innovation hubs. UNICEF has a great innovation office, and there's important work being done there to pilot and scale approaches that in some cases, in UNICEF's case, has funding attached to it. So there is space to really explore and have a bit of a sandbox and learn through that. And I also wanted to flag an initiative that was announced earlier this year. Michael Keating spoke about the important role of the private sector around famine in Somalia. Earlier this year, the UN, the World Bank, and ICRC joined with Amazon, Google, and Microsoft to announce the Famine Action Mechanism, which is taking some of the data and technology tools that these large private sector organizations have and leveraging them to better understand and predict food crises and be able to intervene before, to avert a full-blown famine. And there's prearranged funding involved with it. And so I think these are some important places that we can look as we're starting to think about scaling. I do think that as we're thinking about tech-driven approaches. We also need to sort of continue and broaden the conversation around how we preserve and protect rights and privacy of people who are beneficiaries of these programs, and make sure that we're contributing to, I mean, we've talked about the deficit of trust, but making sure that we're not undermining and indeed are contributing to building out further trust.
Do you recognize what Goran just said about the danger that civil society is becoming part of the system and therefore is becoming less effective as a result? It needs to be more disruptive as opposed to appearing to be elite.
I think it's a really important point, and I think Goran's probably better placed than I am to be able to sort of assess that situation. I mean, I do. We talked earlier in the day about the power of partnerships through the Sustainable Development Goals, and I do think that civil society partnering with governments and partnering with private sector is going to be an incredibly important part of that story, but it does require that there's space for some of these important conversations around nationalism and isolationism that civil society has a unique role to play.
Okay, I know you've got to leave in a moment, so can I just ask you, what's your view of what Goran said? There's a danger that actually it becomes part of the system. It's becoming almost unradical to be part of civil society now. And there's also something I want to ask you about Yemen.
I think there is a degree of truth in what is being said. I think there is always the risk of, when you start institutionalizing that, you know, organizations become part of the system. That's why I think we also need to continue looking at what is not organized and not necessarily push everything and everybody to be organized and institutionalized.
You want more disruptors out there?
Absolutely.
Giving you a hard time?
It's not a hard time. It is, again, helping us increasing
but questioning
impact.
Maybe.
And that's the right thing that needs to be done. That's why I've said in the beginning, when you talk in terms of increasing impact, it is not only just more people, it is also to be much more accountable vis-a-vis the people we are serving. It is guaranteeing that we're much more timely, that we are much more quality-driven, and we need to be held accountable to that.
While you're here, I mean, because you've literally got to go in 2 minutes, according to my watch anyway. Yemen, and what you're facing there, just give us an update, given what we're talking about impact, but also about the really appalling situation in several parts of the world, one of which, of course, is Yemen, where half the country faces famine.
Well, I'm just coming out of Yemen, and I will repeat what I have said since. Yemen is hell on earth, on all counts. And I can explain that with the statistics from a children's perspective. 7 million kids going to bed every single night hungry, 2 million acute malnourished children, 400,000 of them severely acute malnourished. That's the emaciated bodies that hit the New York Times. Well, that is one picture. You travel around Yemen, in every single village you will find them. So it is unprecedented, and the figures as such may be mind-boggling, but the moment you enter into Yemen, the moment you engage with the kids, the moment you engage with their parents, those people who care, doctors, medical staff, you just do realize how dire and how deep the crisis is. Again, a crisis, and talking about impact, linking it to one where we are also facing an unprecedented complexity of delivering assistance, where we are challenged from all sides, not least to start with, we have to deal with two distinct authorities we need to work through. We are dealing with a foreign coalition who has the access, who controls the access to the ports where we need to get our humanitarian and commercial supplies in.
We could talk at great length, but one of the reasons I raise it is because of what Wolfgang Ischinger, the chairman of the Munich Security Conference, said, with a number of very significant headline findings, one of which was about the acceleration of moral bankruptcy of our leaders, that leaders are guilty for not having got involved in this. But above all, international law is now protecting dictators who exact cruelty and punishment on populations. In other words, international law is bankrupt. Is that something which, I'm sorry to throw that at you at this point, but is that something which is on your mind, that really there's simply no level of protection which could have protected these people, those 2 million, those 7 million kids who go to bed hungry, to prevent them being in that situation?
I don't think the system is bankrupt. What is missing is a majority of people who still stand up for the principles through political leadership, who stands up for the values behind humanitarian development assistance. There are, again, Yemen being a good example, there are too many other agendas that are prevailing. If we are looking at Yemen today, why is it so dramatic? It is not just the last few years of war that have caused this reality. It is also decades of Yemeni people who have had a government that has put every single other interest at the center rather than the interest of the Yemeni people. And that's what you get if you have this kind of governance. The people are suffering, the kids are suffering.
All right, well, look, I think you need to leave. I'm not pushing you off, but you walk out whenever you want. But I wanted to ask you at this stage, and I know it's a slight distraction from what we were saying or discussing, but it's important to have heard that as we've talked about Yemen. So thank you very much indeed for being here. Tom, would you like to come and join me up here? But let me now go to Ruben and also back to Andreas, because just picking up some of those points, particularly the broadening of civil society and the kind of things we've heard from Goran as well about the bankruptcy, almost, the way that civil society needs to disrupt itself to be more effective. Ruben.
I will try to be brief, and I will.
Please be, yeah.
Yeah, I will make only 4 points, 2 negative and 2 positive. And like you know, I'm an investment banker, and I was quite good student, and I learned my lesson when I first time came in New York in 1992. I remember for first day we met in Merrill Lynch. It was in the blackboard was written, knowing your client. I think number one problem, which we are not touching, and I'm sorry to be negative now, who is people who are giving money and why we're giving money. We did a survey, which we never will publish, and I will tell you the results, which is, I think, is common for the world, not only for...
So you're publishing it here now?
I will not publishing. I'm just saying without numbers and without who. I'm just saying the key points which we found, because the questionnaire was not direct, it was indirectly defined, because we asked the question, why people giving money, and what we found is very interesting. It was 8 points why people giving money, and it's from 8.7, it will be makes you feel not very comfortable, because it's one of the reasons why it's so inefficient. The first, emotional reaction. My mother was in this hospital, I will give money in this hospital. Doesn't matter if the hospital need money or not. My mother or my village need this. I want to give my village because I'm from this village. I've been asked hundreds of times, are you from Tatev or I'm from Dilijan? I say, no, I'm not from Tatev, I'm not from Dilijan. I'm doing it because of a different reason. Second point, I'm giving because I want to be a member of the club. I'm giving money to Harvard. Doesn't matter, it's not helping education improvement, because Harvard has $40 billion, not need more money, but it's people giving money because they want to give money to Harvard, because they want to be part of the club. The third, we're giving because we're feeling guilty. We are rich and poor. For this, when you're guilty, you're not giving a see result. You just want to be sure you yourself buying the forgivenesses. The four, you want to know your name be recognized. That's why Stanford came, said, I want to give money to Harvard. You say no. And he went in the West Coast and built the Stanford. Number 5, tax deal. I will do because I will get benefits from tax or from church or whatever. I will get the special deal which allowed me to feel. The 5th is religion, which is very important. Religion is a big, important element why people giving money and continuing from $400 billion in America, $300 billion into the religious institutions, because people feel in the end, maybe the God exists, less better I will give, for some it will be secure, hedging myself. I'm joking, I'm sorry, but really some people believe really, and I don't want to joke about this. But anyway, it's religion. It's also not about result. It's about I want to give because I believe God is a request for me being religion. Number 7 is fashion. because you want to talk with the people, and when you're talking in your circle, say, "Oh, my wife is also helping orphanage school or kindergarten," or whatever, because it's good subject to talk between the elite people. If you look at all 7 key points that I mentioned, we're all not about results. This is why, unfortunately, one of the key problems which I found being investment bank and entering in this industry, donors who gives money not putting the pressure to ask results. This is why this entire industry not result-oriented. And this is one of the problems, because most of the money coming in this industry, in charity, philanthropy, talking, is not about result. Only few people, number 8, is giving strategically, because they believe it's strategic importance of the philanthropy and charity to really transfer industry, transfer some. That's why I would say 92% money is giving today. It's about this, okay? Number 2 problem, measurement. It's continue, we can talk about anything about charity, but continue the Forbes magazine publishing who is the rich, and by money, not by social, without having social units, without really discovering some measurement mechanism. This all will become continued crap. What is the speculation? What is real result? What is social impact or not? Another problem, the social impact is at 25 years. Time gap. Usually, effect of your social activity is 25 years ahead, and most of the financial instrument is 10 years bond issuing, 7 years private equity, venture fund 10 years, talking about 10 years maximum. There's a big gap in financial. So the measurement and why you're giving money is a big problem. The good news now, the 2 programs about good news very briefly. First, $70 trillion will change the hands of the wealth during the next 10, 15 years.
70 trillion.
$70 trillion will change the hands of the owners because of the baby boomers dying, because of Russia and China, first generation of rich people will pass away, because also the new wealth, the wealth is transformation will happen dramatically. It will be big transformation, and new generation will look differently about with how the money will go investing in philanthropy, because first time we're living in a world where is the talented person saying, I don't want to just make GDP. Nobody cares about GDP anymore. People live a normal life with happiness. That's why philanthropy not anymore becoming, here I'm making money, here I'm doing good things. It needs to become combined elements for success of the economy. Not about religion, not about emotion, but it's becoming successful. You must build system which people will feel it's economically and socially comparable, coherent, and it's why the good news for all of us, with requests will come from economical, the philanthropy and charity will become more professional and more coherent with the business activity. And the last and not least, technology will disrupt the people, young, like Zuckerberg, many others. Because a lot of young people coming very rich in a young age, it's the first time we'll be very not disruptive, not only technology, we'll do social disruption also, because they will look differently from how their money will be invested in this area. It also will bring interesting dimension, which nobody understands, but it's coming, and soon we'll see it.
And a lot of the next generation will not get rich, though.
No, it's why the generation will become rich, but they will do differently. We're doing it Ubers and others, they will not use money. Like my kids, they don't have a driving license because they don't want to buy the car. They don't see reason to buy the car because they can drive the Uber, and this is easier for them.
Yeah. Can we get the microphone to over there? I'll come to you in a moment. Just picking up, Andreas, on some of these points, particularly what Goran has said and what we heard about there, that the definition of civil society is simply too narrow. And also that it's not disruptive enough and it's becoming part of the elite. In other words, it's becoming part of the system. It's just a classic part of the system. So there's nothing revolutionary about it anymore.
So there's one sentence answer to all of these questions. Civil society is diverse. We are at the moment discussing civil society as would be a one uniformed block. That's not the case. And so now that's basically the answer to all the points you have raised. So of course civil society plays a completely different role in a country like India or in Yemen or in Bangladesh or in Germany. So this is something we have to take into account.
So you're saying that at conferences like this we shouldn't say civil society thinks this, simply because it's so diverse.
It's so diverse and it plays different roles. Of course, I mean, if I'm living in a country like Bulgaria or in Hungary, it might play a completely different role like in Germany, even though we are in Europe, because it has to be more critical. It has to be more a counterpart to what the government does. So that's why I'm saying we shouldn't see it as one unit. And that also is an answer to your point, because I completely disagree that it's seen civil society is always seen being part of the elite. I think it might be the case if we are seeing philanthropy. Philanthropy, in many cases, seems to be very close to the governments because the impression is that it's stabilizing the current systems. But if I see the broad spectrum of civil society, then it's not at all being associated with the governments. I mean, I showed the numbers. So in Germany, we have 30 million people working as volunteers. These are people being part of civil society, and by no means they're just stabilizing the elite. So they are really grassroots organizations, people doing something immediately for the beneficiaries. So that's why I'm saying civil society is diverse, and so we should also have a different perspective on where we are pushing it and where we're supporting it, and we need other ways how to do that.
Goran, are you saying civil society to be effective has to be subversive? Am I using the wrong adjective there?
Yes. Yeah, it's not about subversion. It's actually about thinking beyond what the possible solutions are. You know, Vardan explained very nicely what will happen if we keep the same system of operations. What if we don't keep the same system of capitalism and the same system of democracy? Then the 70 trillion may change hands in a very different scenario. Now, I'm not in favor of that. I don't work in that favor. But I think lately we've taken a great deal of comfort to sort of imagine only those scenarios that will continue to sort of operate in the trajectory that we live. We have a good reason in this continent, that's 70 years of prosperity. Now, but the question is that that same region is a subject to disruption. And you know, some of it is positive, some of it is negative. Unfortunately, at the moment, actually those who are best organized are on the negative end. Look, if I open the cyberspace, you know, human rights, including in this country, will be defined as I have a right to hate. That's who conquered the cyberspace. You know, and that this is where I'm saying that, and this is, you know, in the category of unpublished researches, because we have plenty of those. Because simply
but he's told us the results.
Yeah, no, but the result is that actually we've scooped 1 year of data on all public forums in Germany on issue of philanthropy, human rights, and civil society, and on the issue of what is your right. I have to tell you, one of the things that will surprise us even, because we thought that the right will be associated with sort of an entitlement linked to benefits, you know, right to health, to pension, and so on. No. Actually, I have a right to be politically incorrect. Basically, if you simplify, you know, I have a right to hate. And I think this is where things have gone wrong. And I'm not saying that, you know, I don't want civil society that we support, civil society that has progress of its own community and the progress of the countries and the continent and the globe to be like that. But it has actually failed to be effective, and that worries me.
You got the microphone?
Hi.
He's got it.
Yes. I just wanted to tap in on the whole debate here about what civil society is. I know I'm still young, and I know I haven't lived half as long as many of you here.
Don't rub it in.
But
but enjoy it while you can.
But what I want to say is that from when I was younger, when I was around 10 and 11, civil society for me was about going out and saying, hey, we want to help people. But today, I feel like it's much more about doing civil disobedience, because when we try and partner up and when we try and cooperate with governments and other parties, it tends to just be pushed aside. We've seen in England and London with Extinction Rebellion going against the government and blockading major business roles to get the attention of governments. We've seen the same happening in France after Macron has made these new taxes, people organizing themselves and making civil disobedience to actually have a voice. And we're seeing the same here in Germany, where after where there was supposed to be deforestation of the Hamburger forest, and then again civil disobedience to show that we don't stand for that and we actually want to do something about it, and not just say, go through dialogue and say, hey, we would really, really want us to be heard, but actually going out there and making sure that we're heard.
We're in danger of getting stuck on something which is really rather important, but with very little time. But civil society, does it mean civil disobedience?
It depends
be
on the
effective?
circumstances.
Okay.
So depending on which society you're operating in, you might take another role. And of course, you have an entire spectrum from just organizations providing acute care or helping, and the ones doing advocacy work, up to the ones really being actively working against the system. So it depends on what are the social challenges. And that comes back to what you said. It's about results orientation or impact orientation. So the ultimate goal is to have positive impact, and then you do backwards engineering what is needed. And civil society has the flexibility to take on a lot of different roles.
With your foundation, I mean, can you share with us how much frustration there is within the foundation that you have to do things within a certain kind of acceptable behavior, given the enormity of what's happening?
In terms of the political situation. So yes, I think there is frustration and there is acute concern. I mean,
Can you break out of it?
Well, the other thing I would say, and it's a little bit dovetailing off of your comments, is that in this environment, you know, yes, and I have no interest in minimizing the risk of this wave of nationalism and isolationism, but we have also seen really vocal support for multilateral engagement and for international cooperation coming from quarters that we don't always hear from. And so, you know, just from a US perspective, we're seeing new forms of collaboration across subnational government leaders, mayors, and governors and universities coming together on issues around climate, around development. We see the US Conference of Mayors calling for full UN funding. I mean, these are things that did not happen in prior administrations, and we're seeing the investor community come out in really strong ways with very specific demands. And I think that tapping into some of that is going to be very important as we look to scaling up, that we think a bit more broadly about some of the ways that society is changing and disrupting the way that we connect, but also giving us opportunities to bring in some of these other voices that are speaking quite strongly.
Maggie,
if I may just use
I warn you, Ruben, can I just say, I warn you, we're in massive time problems.
I'm not talking. I want to introduce the 4 students from ASMT who are going to Armenia to work on a project in Armenia because of exactly what you mentioned is becoming a reality. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Okay. Maggie, quickly.
Sorry
Can I just check, how long do people want to stay here? Till 6 or 7 or 8?
No. Unfortunately, the people from UNICEF has gone, yes, because I have a case, experience in a refugee camp. For example, a UN agency for the coordination, when they want to help, they will exchange with civil society and also agency for UN agency, but not beneficiaries. They will not have permission to ask. I give example bags of UNICEF. We have, for example, they will distribute bags, but we don't need those bags. We have, for example, sewing machine, and we want to sew our bags, but because bureaucracy, they will not be allowed to change, flexibility to change how to help beneficiaries.
All right, I'm going to have to be very brutal because of time here, so please, can we have the microphone? I just want to get as many voices, and literally, Tom, I'm coming to you in a moment. Don't think you're getting off the hook here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Katharina Wagner, and I work with McKinsey in our Berlin office. And the reason I wanted to share something is that we've actually looked at how to scale up the impact of social entrepreneurs in Germany, and I wanted to share 2 of my impressions and observations there. First, more data. Many of these entrepreneurs do not collect enough data to understand where their impact is coming from. So in my opinion, there should be more collection and analysis. Second, automation. If you look at what industries are doing, there's a lot of automation going on there. There's a lot of new technologies. And I feel like the social sector could leverage a lot of that because resources are so scarce and you can do a lot of the manual work that makes resources scarce. You could automate that. So I think that is the second topic that we should put more thought into what we can leverage that.
To your right, to Roland, please. Who else has got their hand up? And Sunita. To Roland first, please. And then to Sunita.
Sorry about that.
I just wanted to add hope on top of what Ruben said, saying that 70 trillion are going to be handed over. There are other initiatives which are bringing even bigger dimensions. One is India. Since 10 years, India has the law that every company, in case they make profits, they should give 2% to sustainability. You would think, what is 2%? I can only invite you, go to India. You'll be surprised what is happening over the last 10 years in India only in regards to education. Go to East Europe. In Romania, this law is existing. Would you have known about that? Go to Slovakia. In Slovakia, the law is even that every private person, when they do their own tax declaration, they have to put 2% and donate to anybody. Imagine this power. And now all what we have to do is we need to connect the dots. That's all.
Thank you. Sunita, and then I'm going to go to Tom to try and pull this together and tell us what we were thinking.
I think I want to re-quote what was said in the morning. There's nothing called as black or white. There are a lot of shades of gray. And that's, I think, also about civil society. Because way civil society is positioning in terms of what their mission is, it defines where they will be. So if I'm somebody who wants a systemic change, then I will insert myself in the system and I'll be part of the system. And therefore, we need to recognize there are differences in the way civil society functions. It's not a monolithic group. And we need to avoid becoming morally superior in terms of saying, okay, they are elite and they are not so elite and things like that, because everybody has a different role to play. The grassroots movement and the disruptors play their movement work. People advocating for certain things play their role. People who want to bring systemic changes play their role. So we need to recognize the differential roles that the civil society plays and becoming less judgmental about what they can be.
Less judgmental. All right, I'll leave that thought. Look, I really don't want to bring this to a close, but we're already past the witching hour. So, Tom, help us understand. And Dorothy, do you want to come in as well? I'll get up and let's bring one of those chairs in. You can sit in that. You can sit in that one. Oh, I can't because it's locked. No,
you stay. That's your place, and I'll join in like that. That's fine.
Tom, try and work out how radical we've been, how revolutionary we've been, given the enormity of the sinister nature of what is happening, encompassed by a lot of people and highlighted by a number of people, but with a degree of optimism, that there is a way forward if there can be the momentum and the agreement and the kind of understanding of the enormity of what's being confronted. So I leave it to you to try and pull together the strands and what we should take away.
Right, so thanks, Nick. This is not really my strong suit, doing this kind of work, but first off, I want to thank everybody for the discussions the past 2 days. This is really fascinating for me. This is kind of a new experience for me working in this environment, so I've learned a heck of a lot. So thanks everybody for the contributions and for you guys and your professionalism. It's been fantastic. Just a few points I picked up over the past couple of days. First off, there's been obviously an erosion of trust and a loss of faith in government and institutions. There's a huge disrespect for international law. Laws are there. They're not really being followed. The sovereignty of the state takes precedence over people, and I think everybody can relate to that. I certainly can. To the point where we have a genocidal dictator who is respected vis-a-vis the people on the ground that are being bombed. There's been a growth of nationalism, isolationism, increased polarization. This has all led to hatred. I think anybody who watches the TV can see far left, far right, full of hatred going at each other's throats. This is not how we're supposed to behave. This responsibility to protect has been totally lost. There is no responsibility to protect. It's totally gone. So what has filled the gap? One of our main discussions was, well, the big institutions have failed. What's there to pick up the slack? Civil society is there. This is NGOs, religious groups, other organizations that have come in to try to fill the gap. And what we talked about just now with this last dialogue is that nonprofits need to cooperate, need to be proactive, and let their voice be heard. Don't be shy, speak out, advocate. There is, however, danger of civil society becoming institutionalized. Now, we've taken all this, we have a lot of energy, a lot of excitement, and now it's time for me to be the football coach and say, where do we go from here? What do we do? And first off, why do we do it? Why do we bother helping anybody? And I want to tie in Aurora, and Aurora does, and what Aurora's mantra is, which is gratitude in action. It's really a known scientific fact that the happiest people are people that show gratitude. They're linked in with each other. People that are grateful are happy. So if you want to be happy, show gratitude. And I think the virtue of everybody is here understanding what I'm saying. We have all something to be very grateful for. Personally, I grew up in the US in a very good family, huge family, loving family, had the best education. Everything was given to me on a silver platter. So I have an obligation to give back. It's not simply I was given this because I'm a good person, or I do this, I do that. I did nothing to warrant all of this. So I have an obligation to give back. So I think all of us here, and this especially goes to the students who are here and younger people. Also older people, we're already kind of rigid in our thinking and a bit cynical. But I think we all have something to be grateful for. It's time to give back. The issue of what exactly to do. You know, there's a story that somebody went to Mother Teresa and said, oh, Mother Teresa, I want to come and volunteer with you. I want to come to Calcutta and work. And I think it was probably the 1,000th person that day that said this to her. And she said, look, go and find your own Calcutta. You know, maybe she was annoyed with the person, but I think the issue is go and find out for yourself what it is you want to do based on your abilities and your talents. Everybody has something to contribute, whether it's financial, whether it's your abilities, your talents. Yeah, I can do medical stuff, but I can't, give me a computer and I'm lost. I can't do anything technological. Everybody has something to contribute. People look at us, let me turn away from myself, look at Maggie and Sunita and Chao, and we say, oh, you people are heroes, you're doing great things, this and that. I think we're all doing something which comes very natural to us. We don't see it as being anything outstanding. Everybody has something within themselves to contribute. We would ask, all you people here have connections. Some of you are big people in your industries, in the government. We're asking you to nominate people for the Aurora Prize coming up. The nominations are closed this year, but they'll pick up for next year. Please think about nominating somebody for the Aurora Prize. And the benefit of Aurora is it really does shine a light on unsung heroes, or people that have their feet on the ground doing the day-to-day tasks. Without this publicity, it's very difficult for us to keep functioning. It's a huge help to us on the ground. Raise awareness about Aurora, about the Aurora Prize, about the Aurora people. We cannot operate in darkness. Darkness was one of our opening themes, opening in dark times. We cannot operate in darkness. By you shedding light on what work we're doing, this is a tremendous help to us. It brings our situations to light. And I think with us we can cooperate. I want to invite everybody to the Aurora Weekend, which will be in October 2019. You're all welcome to come to Armenia. I'm there now, and I'll be going back to Nuba in March, but I'll be back in October for the Aurora Weekend. Last off, I want to thank the partners for putting this all together. This has been a tremendous event, and you can tell the amount of work that went into this 2 days. We're here for 2 days, but this took months and months to prepare. So thanks especially to GPI. Dr. Ingrid Hamm is here. I want to thank the Federal Foreign Office, the Robert Bosch Stiftung, is that right? Stiftung, I like that word. Robert Bosch Stiftung, and Christoph was here, I think he's gone out now. Christoph's still here, thanks Christoph. Right. Roland Berger Stiftung, UNICEF, and ENY. So thanks to everybody for making this dialogue possible.
That's it. It's enough.
What?
We have to say
yeah,
it.
Yeah,
we don't have to say anything, do we?
We had thought about whether Dorothy and I should say something, not long, but just to give a sense of, we've been sitting here, we can push the debate, but you might be interested in our reflections, not least because Christoph talked about the sandbox and the danger of righteousness. And it's easy for us as moderators to sound righteous because we can ask the easy questions or the difficult questions, and other people have to provide the answer. And I say this with, we have no responsibility. We have a degree of humility, I think, that so many of you are engaged in things which many of which I've seen in my time on the road over 4 decades. But at least I can often get on a plane and come back. Now it's rather different. I'm struck by one thing. You all talk about the media. The media is what you've got in your pocket these days. It is not about where I used to work. It's about everything. I can now watch everything off my handset, almost everywhere, anywhere in the world. And that's about a proliferation of transparent stuff, which, yes, it can be somehow distorted by some people. But there is still a way of getting a lot of information in this environment where many of the things that have been talked about 10 years ago would not have even been visible or known about, certainly in real time. It's changing and it's changed, and that's putting policymakers on watch, that they can't get away with ignoring stuff like what happened 3 years ago with on the 21st of August with the big chemical attack in Damascus, when that was on the agenda within a few hours, as was all the telemetry. So that's one thought I've got. And secondly, Dorothy, you might want to just add something yourself. I came straight here from Katowice, from the climate change conference. And my thought, as someone who does this a lot, not just in this area, but a lot of areas, and I'm doing a massive project on thinking the unthinkable. And I say that not to promote it, but actually it's something I started when I stepped aside from the BBC, because leaders are really struggling to grip the enormity of what's happening. The conformity which qualifies them to the top disqualifies them from understanding many of the things that you've been talking about here. And I think it's one bit of advice I'd like to offer you, which is coming through from all our research, is the difficulty there is for those in positions of responsibility to act at the speed that's necessary. And they're scared, they're fearful, they're overwhelmed, and they're worried about whether they can still be leaders. And it comes from one-to-one confidential interviews. We've got hundreds of them. So there's a changing of the framework. And I think underpinning much of what I've heard is something which I heard from Rachel Kite, who used to be at the World Bank and is now CEO of an important climate change organization. When she was in Katowice literally 2 days ago, and she said this in something which I was chairing. But it's about what happened in Paris last weekend, what is happening in the United Kingdom at the moment, what is happening in Latin America at the moment. She said the public has now recalibrated expectations. We are in danger of misunderstanding what they are saying. And that's because the framing of assumptions is going to have to move a lot faster in this very fast world. And what was happening in Katowice, the Paris Agreement, not because what I'm about to say is it was happening in Paris, what was happening in France with Macron's problems of the diesel tax is going to have a profound effect on many governments about whether they even dare to introduce a diesel tax at a time when diesel is shown to be so dirtying. So what happened with the backlash by 80% of the population, either on the streets or whatever, the backlash is already going to have effect on the climate change and the ability of politicians to handle this, because they're fearful that they're going to have a similar backlash when they raise tax on diesel. So that's why I'm quoting Rachel and saying the public has recalibrated expectations. We are in danger of misunderstanding what they are saying, because everything that's come out here has got to be taken with the public as well. Dorothy.
Yeah, well, saying that politicians don't know where to go, then of course we don't really feel comfortable with this uncertainty and the state of uncertainty and not knowing. And that's what's interesting to me to think about this conference, is how do you live with this kind of uncertainty, and what do you draw from it for your personal, psychological way of continuing your life in this particular world. And thinking about that, seeing all this bleakness, seeing all this trouble and loss of control upwards, and climate change and all that, it comes down, what it boils down to, if you want to think about it, how you deal with it personally, is again looking at good stories. I mean, interesting, inspiring stories as certain individuals give them to us, that make us think, that may help to think as, okay, if you were able to do certain things out of nothing and out of a really difficult, uncertain situation, then maybe some of us will be able to do something, at least continue and to do the best, knowing that the world has never been good and never will be good and will never be just, and nothing will be, we can be happy if we can keep it the way it is and have a humanitarian crisis here and there. There will always be a humanitarian crisis. We'll never make it good, but we have to live with it somehow, with this knowledge. And that's why I think it's good to see that even then, think of Aurora, think of the sunrise, think of strong personal stories, and then our function as a media would be to tell those stories and make those people visible and hearable, and hear those voices and keep at least that. And then go on.
Shall we both
Go
say
on
thank you
and
to
don't
Aurora,
despair.
thank you to Ingrid and to Daniel and to Leila and all the whole team here for making this work. It's not easy organising conferences, particularly when people back out literally just before they're due to arrive. So, you know, this is, it's a danger zone being an organiser of a conference these days, knowing who's going to turn up. So well done, Ingrid, well done, Daniel and Leila. Thank you.